Map. A sheriff arrived at my ranch gate demanding my keys. But he never knew the quiet ranch owner he confronted was prepared to expose the truth behind the HOA's power. Welcome back, everyone. Before today's story begins, I want to thank each and every one of you for being here. If this is your first time on the channel, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you'll always know when a new story is released. Your support means more than you know. Every like, comment, and subscription helps this channel grow and allows us to keep sharing incredible stories with viewers around the world. And before we begin, tell me this: where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel. Now, grab a comfortable seat, relax, and let's dive into today's unforgettable story. The smell of fresh asphalt still clung to the air when I stepped back onto my property that morning. The sound of construction crews echoed across the fields, metal beams hitting concrete, engines growling like they owned the place. I stood there in my old work boots, staring at a neighborhood that wasn't supposed to exist. 3 weeks earlier, I had come home expecting silence. I expected the crackle of leaves under my feet, the wind moving through the trees my grandfather planted, and the old wooden fence line that marked everything my family had built. Instead, I found orange survey flags, bulldozers, and strangers walking across land that carried my family's name. My name is Daniel Carter, and for most of my life, I never cared about being rich. I cared about keeping promises. My grandfather bought this land 40 years ago with money he earned fixing farm equipment. Every scratch on the old barn door, every rusted nail in the fence, was part of a story I grew up with. That was the part the HOA never understood. To them, it was an empty piece of dirt waiting for development. To me, it was home. The woman leading the takeover was Victoria Caldwell, president of Oak Ridge Valley HOA. She had the kind of confidence that came from never hearing the word no. Her designer sunglasses, perfect white smile, and expensive perfume arrived before she did. She stepped out of her SUV that afternoon like she was inspecting a property she had already purchased. "Daniel," she said, looking around with a disappointed expression. "I understand this is emotional, but progress happens whether people accept it or not." I remember the way she said those words. Not angry, not threatening. Worse, certain. She handed me a folder filled with documents claiming the HOA had rights to develop part of my land. The papers were covered in legal language designed to make ordinary people give up before they even started fighting. And for a moment, I almost did. I contacted a local attorney. He looked through the paperwork, shook his head, and told me the fight could take years. The fees alone could bury me. He suggested accepting a settlement and moving on. But there was one thing he didn't know. I spent 15 years working in construction management. I knew buildings. I knew permits. I knew when paperwork smelled wrong. And this paperwork smelled wrong. That night, sitting alone at my grandfather's old kitchen table, I spread every document across the wood surface. The room was quiet except for the ticking clock above the stove and the rain tapping against the window. Then I noticed something. A date. One tiny detail hidden inside dozens of pages. The HOA's approval paperwork was signed before they legally had access to the property records they claimed to use. They hadn't made a mistake. They had rushed. I pulled out the old filing box my grandfather kept in the closet. The cardboard was soft from age, and the smell of dust and old paper filled the room. Inside were decades of tax records, surveys, and one envelope I had never opened. My hands shook when I saw the handwriting. My grandfather's handwriting. Inside was a copy of the original land agreement and a private access clause that had never been recorded in the HOA's development documents. The same clause that gave my family complete control over the exact section they were trying to build on. I sat there in silence, reading the final sentence again and again. The land they were claiming wasn't theirs. It never was. And Victoria Caldwell had just built her entire empire on a foundation she didn't own. The next morning, I made one phone call. Not to beg, not to negotiate, to start the process that would bring everything crashing down. Because the HOA thought they were taking land from a quiet homeowner. They didn't realize they had just challenged someone who had been waiting for the right moment to prove the truth. The next morning, I drove back to Oak Ridge Valley before sunrise. The road was still wet from the overnight rain, and the tires of my truck crushed through small puddles along the gravel path. The smell of damp earth mixed with diesel fumes from the construction equipment sitting on my land. Victoria Caldwell was already there. She stood beside the unfinished homes wearing a cream-colored jacket that probably cost more than the tools I carried in my truck. Her arms were crossed, watching workers move around like she was the owner of everything she could see. That was when I realized something. She wasn't worried. Not even a little. People who know they're wrong usually leave room for doubt. Victoria didn't have doubt. She had confidence built on years of nobody challenging her. And that made her dangerous. I walked toward her with the documents inside my folder. The same folder I had spent the entire night building. Every survey map, every property record, every old agreement my grandfather had saved. Victoria noticed the papers and smiled. "Daniel, I hope you came to be reasonable." That word, reasonable. People like Victoria always used it when they wanted someone else to surrender. I looked past her at the construction crews. Reasonable would have been asking permission before building on someone else's land. Her smile tightened for half a second. Then it came back. "You're misunderstanding the situation. The HOA has invested significant money here. These homes are already approved. You can't just stop progress because of some old family documents." Some old family documents. That was when I felt something cold settle in my chest. She wasn't just ignoring the truth. She was counting on the truth being inconvenient. I pulled out the first survey map and placed it on the hood of my truck. The morning sunlight reflected off the windshield as I pointed to the property line. "This is where your development ends." She looked down, then laughed. Not a nervous laugh, a confident one. The kind of laugh someone gives when they think they already won. "Daniel, do you really think a piece of paper from decades ago is going to beat an entire neighborhood?" That sentence told me everything I needed to know. Victoria didn't respect ownership. She respected power, and she believed the HOA had more of it. For the next few days, she proved exactly how far she was willing to go. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. A thick envelope. Official HOA letterhead. The kind designed to make ordinary homeowners feel small before they even opened it. Inside was a demand for immediate access rights and a warning that failure to cooperate could result in legal action. Then came the fines. Daily penalties for interfering with community development. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, staring at that paper while my coffee went cold beside me. The smell of fresh ink filled the room, but all I could think about was my grandfather's voice. Never let someone convince you that your silence means permission. So I didn't fight loudly. I didn't scream at meetings. I didn't make threats. I started collecting. Every phone call, every email, every construction notice, every conversation where Victoria acted like my property already belonged to her. Because I learned something years ago in business. People who abuse power always leave fingerprints. They just assume nobody is looking. A week later, Victoria called an emergency HOA meeting. She invited every homeowner except me. Her message was simple. She wanted everyone to believe I was the problem. According to her, I was blocking progress, hurting property values, and refusing to support the community. But something unexpected happened. A few neighbors started asking questions. They wanted to know why nobody had seen the original land transfer. They wanted to know why the HOA documents changed so quickly. And most importantly, they wanted to know why Victoria looked nervous every time someone mentioned the county records. Because the truth was starting to move faster than her story. And Victoria Caldwell still didn't understand the biggest mistake she had made. She thought the battle was about land. It wasn't. It was about proving that someone with enough confidence could still be wrong. And I was about to show her that the quietest person in the room is sometimes the one holding the winning card. The first real attack came on a Thursday morning. I remember the sound before I saw anything. A sharp metallic bang echoed from the front gate, followed by the low rumble of a truck engine sitting outside my property. I walked out holding my coffee, still wearing the same jacket from the night before, and saw an orange violation notice taped to my fence. The wind was blowing hard enough to make the paper snap against the wood. That little piece of paper bothered me more than it should have. Not because of the fine, because of what it represented. Victoria Caldwell wasn't trying to win a legal argument anymore. She was trying to make me feel powerless. The notice claimed I had illegally blocked community access improvements and threatened daily penalties until I removed my own fence from my own land. I stood there staring at those words while the smell of wet grass and cold morning air filled my lungs. For a moment, I thought about my grandfather. He built that fence himself. Every post was measured by hand. Every section carried years of weather, storms, and repairs. It wasn't just wood and nails. It was proof. And Victoria wanted me to tear it down because a piece of HOA paper told her she could. That afternoon, I went to the HOA office. I wanted answers. The building was exactly what I expected. Glass doors, perfect landscaping, a lobby filled with framed awards celebrating community leadership. The air smelled like expensive perfume and fresh paint. Victoria sat behind a large desk, surrounded by paperwork. She didn't look surprised when I walked in. Actually, she looked pleased. "Daniel," she said, leaning back in her chair. "I was wondering when you would understand the situation." I placed the violation notice on her desk. "You mean the situation where you're fining me for protecting my own property?" She smiled. That same calm, practiced smile. "The HOA has responsibilities. We can't allow one homeowner to interfere with progress." There it was again. Progress. Her favorite word. A word she used whenever she wanted people to stop asking questions. I leaned forward. "Show me the document that gives you authority over my land." For the first time, her expression changed. Only slightly. A small pause. A quick movement of her eyes toward the filing cabinet behind her. Most people would have missed it. I didn't. Years in construction taught me something important. The smallest crack tells you where the structure is weakest. Victoria recovered quickly. "Our attorneys have reviewed everything." "Then they won't mind showing me." Silence. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. The room suddenly felt smaller. Finally, she folded her hands and said, "You're making this more difficult than it needs to be." I walked out without another word. Because I already had my answer. She didn't have the document. She had confidence. And confidence doesn't win in court. Evidence does. Over the next 2 weeks, I started digging deeper. I visited the county records office every morning before work. The building smelled like old paper, dust, and coffee that had been sitting too long on a hot plate. I went through everything. Property maps, development applications, permit requests. And then I found something strange. The HOA's construction approval included a boundary map that didn't match the official county survey. Someone had moved the property line. Not accidentally. Not by mistake. Intentionally. The line had been shifted exactly 47 feet into my land. 47 feet that allowed them to build 3 additional homes. 3 homes that would make Victoria's development worth hundreds of thousands more. I sat there holding the document, feeling the weight of what I had discovered. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a plan. Victoria hadn't taken my land because she thought she could. She took it because she believed nobody would notice. And that was her biggest mistake. Because while she was busy building houses on stolen ground, I was building something much more dangerous. A case. A case built piece by piece. And every document I collected was another brick in the wall that would eventually come down on her. Victoria Caldwell thought she was fighting one homeowner. She didn't realize she had just created a paper trail that would expose everything. The moment I realized the property line had been moved wasn't the moment I felt angry. It was the moment I felt calm. Because anger makes people rush. Calm makes people dangerous. I spent the next several days doing something Victoria Caldwell never expected. I stopped fighting her, and I started documenting her. Every morning before work, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of black coffee, the old wooden surface covered with maps, copies, and handwritten notes. The room still carried the faint smell of cedar from my grandfather's cabinets, the same place where he kept every receipt, every contract, every piece of paper he thought mattered. Turns out, he was right. Paper matters, especially when someone thinks they can rewrite history. I contacted the county survey office and requested every official record connected to the original property boundaries. The clerk helping me was an older man named Harold who had worked there for almost 30 years. He looked through the documents quietly. Then he stopped. "You know this boundary was changed during the HOA approval process, right?" I looked at him. "What do you mean changed?" He turned the monitor toward me. The original survey line was there. Clear. Untouched. Then beside it was the development map submitted by Oak Ridge Valley. 47 feet missing. 47 feet of my land absorbed into their project. Harold leaned back in his chair. "I've seen mistakes before. This doesn't look like one." Those words stayed with me, because I knew exactly what it looked like. Someone had taken a shortcut. Someone had assumed nobody would check. And someone had built an entire neighborhood on that assumption. When Victoria realized I was still investigating, she changed tactics. The friendly approach disappeared. The next letter arrived from her attorney. Not Victoria. Her attorney. That was how people like her operated. They hid behind expensive paper and professional language, hoping the weight of the letter would scare people into surrender. The message was simple: stop challenging the HOA, accept the development, or prepare for a legal battle. I read that letter 3 times. Then I placed it beside my grandfather's old property documents. The contrast was almost unbelievable. One side represented intimidation. The other represented decades of honest ownership. That night, I walked outside and stood near the old fence line. The moonlight reflected off the metal posts, and the wind moved through the grass like it had done 1,000 times before. I remembered being 10 years old, following my grandfather around while he repaired that fence. Measure twice, he told me, because fixing mistakes costs more than doing things right. I didn't understand it back then. I do now. The next week, I attended the HOA meeting. For the first time, I wasn't there to defend myself. I was there to ask questions. The clubhouse was packed. Residents filled the chairs, whispering as I walked in. Some looked uncomfortable. Some avoided eye contact. They had been afraid of Victoria for a long time. She stood at the front of the room beside a presentation screen showing images of the new development. Our community is growing, she announced. But unfortunately, one homeowner continues to create unnecessary conflict. Everyone knew she meant me. Then she showed pictures of my fence, calling it an obstruction, calling it a threat, calling it something that needed to be removed. I waited until she finished. Then I stood up. Can I ask one question? The room went quiet. Victoria smiled. Of course. I held up the official county survey. Why does the HOA development map show a different property boundary than the county records? The smile disappeared. Not slowly. Instantly. The room changed. People leaned forward. For the first time, Victoria wasn't controlling the story. She was answering it. And as she searched for words, I saw something I had never seen before. Fear. Because she finally understood. The battle was no longer between Victoria Caldwell and Daniel Carter. It was between her version of the truth and the documents that proved she was wrong. The silence in that clubhouse was the first sign that Victoria Caldwell had lost control. For years, she had been the person standing at the front of the room, the person holding the microphone, the person deciding which questions mattered and which ones disappeared. But that night was different, because everyone was looking at the same document, the official county survey, not Victoria's presentation, not her carefully prepared slides, not her polished explanation about community improvement. The truth was sitting on the table in black and white. I watched her fingers tighten around the edge of the podium. Small movement, almost invisible, but I saw it. The same woman who walked onto my property like she owned it was suddenly searching for an answer she didn't have. We need to remember, she finally said, forcing her voice back into that calm leadership tone, that documents can be interpreted in different ways. Different ways. That was her defense. Not that the map was wrong. Not that the records were fake. Just that maybe everyone should look at it differently. I almost laughed. Because when someone starts arguing with facts, you already know they're running out of options. After the meeting, several neighbors approached me quietly. They didn't want to speak in front of Victoria. That told me everything. One man named Robert pulled me aside near the parking lot. The cold air carried the smell of rain and wet pavement, and his voice dropped low. Daniel, you're not the first person she's pushed around. I looked at him. What do you mean? He glanced back toward the clubhouse. She's been doing this for years. Small changes, small favors, small paperwork adjustments. That sentence stayed with me. Small changes. That's how people like Victoria operate. They don't take everything at once. They take an inch, then another, until one day, they own the entire room. The next morning, I started looking into more than just my property. I requested HOA meeting records, financial reports, development agreements, anything connected to Oak Ridge Valley. And slowly, the pattern appeared. The missing property line wasn't the only problem. There were construction contracts approved without full board review. There were payments made to companies connected to people close to Victoria. There were decisions that benefited the same small group over and over again. The deeper I looked, the less it looked like an accident. It looked organized. I remember sitting at my desk late one night, surrounded by papers, with only the sound of my computer fan filling the room. The screen light reflected off the documents in front of me. For weeks, I thought I was fighting over 47 feet of land. I was wrong. The land was only the beginning. Victoria had built a system where nobody questioned her. And systems like that only survive when people stay silent. So I did something unexpected. I stopped focusing on getting my property back. I started building a case that would show everyone exactly how she got there. The following Monday, I contacted an attorney who specialized in property fraud and HOA disputes. Unlike the first lawyer I spoke with, this one didn't immediately talk about costs. He studied the documents. Then he leaned back. "Daniel, this isn't just a boundary dispute." I waited. He tapped the papers with his finger. "This looks like a pattern of misrepresentation." Those words hit differently, because now I knew I wasn't just defending my grandfather's land. I was defending every homeowner who had been too afraid to question Victoria. A few days later, Victoria sent me another letter. This one wasn't polite. It demanded that I remove my fence within 10 days. It threatened court action. It ended with a sentence meant to intimidate me. "The HOA will pursue every available remedy." I read it carefully. Then I placed it beside my grandfather's old documents. And for the first time since this started, I smiled. Because Victoria thought the next move belonged to her. She didn't know I had already made mine. The papers she used to threaten me were the same papers that were going to expose her. The day I filed the lawsuit, the sky was gray. Not dramatic. Not like the movies. Just gray. The kind of morning where everything feels quiet right before something changes. I stood outside the county courthouse holding a folder filled with months of evidence. The papers inside were heavier than they should have been. Not because of the weight. Because every page represented someone choosing control over honesty. The courthouse smelled like old wood, printer ink, and coffee from a machine that had probably been there for 20 years. I walked through those doors knowing one thing. I wasn't walking in there to fight Victoria Caldwell. I was walking in there to expose what she built. My attorney, James Whitmore, met me near the entrance. He had reviewed everything we collected. The altered maps, the unauthorized approvals, the financial records, the emails between HOA board members. He looked at me and said something I'll never forget. "Daniel, people like this usually win because nobody wants the headache of fighting them." I looked down at the folder in my hand. That's exactly why they keep doing it. The lawsuit was officially filed that morning. Property interference, fraudulent representation, unauthorized development activity. The words sounded complicated on paper, but the reality was simple. Victoria took something that wasn't hers and convinced everyone around her that questioning her was the problem. When she received the court notice, her reaction came quickly. Too quickly. Within 48 hours, she called another HOA meeting. This time, she wasn't smiling. I heard about it from Robert, who attended and later called me. "Daniel," he said, his voice low, "she's trying to turn everyone against you." I wasn't surprised. That was Victoria's favorite weapon. Fear. She told residents the lawsuit could damage the neighborhood. She claimed property values would collapse. She suggested I was attacking the community instead of protecting my own land. But something had changed. People were listening differently. Because once someone sees the truth, it becomes harder to convince them they imagined it. Then came the discovery process. And that was where everything started falling apart. My attorney requested internal HOA communications. At first, Victoria's legal team tried to delay. They asked for extensions. They questioned the relevance. They pushed back on every request. But eventually, the documents had to be produced. And when they arrived, we found what we were looking for. The emails. One message from Victoria to a developer stood out. She wrote that the additional homes would significantly increase community revenue after acquiring the unused land section. The problem? She never owned that land. She knew. That was the moment everything changed. Because mistakes can be explained. Accidents can be forgiven. But knowing something is wrong and doing it anyway is different. I remember sitting in James's office when he printed that email. The machine hummed. Paper slid out slowly. A normal sound. But that piece of paper felt like a hammer hitting concrete. The entire foundation of Victoria's argument was cracking. She didn't have a misunderstanding. She had a plan. A week later, the judge issued an order stopping all construction on the disputed section of land. For the first time in months, the bulldozers were silent. No engines. No metal crashing. No workers walking across my grandfather's property. Just wind moving through the grass. I stood at the edge of the field that evening and listened to that silence. It felt different. Peaceful. Almost like the land itself knew someone had finally listened. But I knew Victoria wasn't finished. People who build their power on control don't give it up easily. She still had supporters. She still had money. She still believed she could escape consequences. What she didn't understand was that the hardest part of the fight wasn't proving she was wrong. It was making sure everyone saw exactly how she did it. And the next piece of evidence we found was about to do more damage than any lawsuit ever could. The evidence that finally broke Victoria Caldwell wasn't hidden in some secret vault. It was sitting in her own files. The same documents she thought protected her were the ones that exposed everything. I remember the morning James called me into his office. The rain was hitting the windows hard, and the sound filled the room while he spread the latest discovery across his desk. No dramatic speech. No celebration. Just silence. Because sometimes the truth is powerful enough that nobody needs to explain it. He pointed to a series of emails between Victoria and the development company. There it was. The conversation she never expected anyone to see. Months before the HOA publicly announced the expansion, Victoria had already discussed the additional homes, the projected profits, and how the unused land section could increase the neighborhood's value. Unused land section. That was how she described my grandfather's property. Not my family's land. Not protected property. Just space waiting to be taken. I stared at those messages for a long time. The anger was there. Of course it was. But underneath it was something stronger. Certainty. Because now I knew exactly what I was fighting. Not confusion. Not a misunderstanding. A decision. Victoria made a choice. And now she had to answer for it. The next court hearing was packed. More people showed up than I expected. Homeowners from Oak Ridge Valley filled the benches. Some had supported Victoria before. Some had stayed silent. But everyone was watching. The courtroom smelled like old wood and paper. The quiet hum of the air conditioner mixed with the sound of people whispering as we waited. Victoria walked in wearing the same confidence she always carried. Perfect hair. Perfect suit. Perfect expression. But something was missing. That certainty. Her attorney argued that the HOA acted in good faith. He called it an administrative mistake. A misunderstanding between property records. But James didn't argue emotionally. He didn't need to. He placed the documents in front of the judge one by one. The original survey. The altered development map. The emails. The approval records. Every piece connected. Every lie had a date. Every decision had a signature. Then James asked one simple question. If this was a mistake, why were discussions about selling the additional homes happening before the property transfer was ever approved? The courtroom went silent. I looked across the room at Victoria. For the first time since this started, she didn't look like the person in control. She looked like someone waiting for the consequences of her own choices. The judge reviewed the documents carefully. Minutes passed. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then came the decision. The construction approvals were suspended immediately. The disputed land was confirmed as belonging to me, and the court ordered a full investigation into the HOA's actions. I didn't feel like celebrating. Not at first, because watching someone lose power isn't the same as healing what they damaged. But when I walked outside afterward, something changed. The rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking apart. I drove back to my property and parked near the old fence line. For months, that area had been filled with noise. Bulldozers, trucks, workers, arguments. Now there was only wind moving through the grass. I placed my hand on one of the old fence posts my grandfather installed decades ago. The wood was rough under my fingers, weathered, but still standing, just like the truth. A few days later, the demolition crews arrived to remove the unauthorized structures. The same machines that once crossed my land without permission were now undoing what they built. The sound of engines filled the air again. But this time, it was different. This time, they weren't taking something. They were restoring it. Victoria Caldwell thought she could rewrite ownership with paperwork. She thought confidence could replace permission. She thought people would stay quiet because fighting back was too difficult. But she forgot one thing. The truth doesn't need permission to exist. It only needs someone willing to stand behind it. And after everything was over, I finally understood what my grandfather meant all those years ago. You don't protect what you own because it's valuable. You protect it because someone before you trusted you to keep it safe. The first morning, without construction noise, felt strange. I woke up expecting it. The heavy engines, the metallic crashes, the distant voices of workers moving across the field. But there was nothing. Just birds. Just wind. Just the sound of my own footsteps on the gravel driveway. For months, my property had felt like a battlefield. Now it finally felt like home again. I walked the same path my Grandfather walked decades earlier. The grass was taller than before, the fence needed repairs, and there were still marks left behind from the machines that had crossed the land. But it was still standing. We were still standing. The weeks after the court decision changed everything in Oak Ridge Valley. The investigation into Victoria Caldwell and the HOA uncovered more than anyone expected. The altered property records were only the beginning. The financial reviews revealed questionable payments, hidden agreements, and decisions made without proper approval. The same people who once stayed silent started speaking. Neighbors who had ignored the warning signs finally admitted they had seen pieces of the truth for years. Robert called me one evening while I was sitting on my porch. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the cool night air, and the old wooden boards beneath my chair creaked every time I moved. "You know what's funny?" he said. "What?" "She made everyone think she was protecting the neighborhood." I looked out across the field. What was she really protecting? There was a long pause. Her control. That was the answer. It was never about community standards. It was never about property values. It was about power. Victoria wanted everyone to believe the HOA was bigger than the people living there. But she forgot something important. Organizations are only as strong as the people who allow them to be. A few months later, the HOA held a new election. For the first time in years, multiple residents volunteered to serve on the board. People who had previously avoided meetings started showing up. They asked questions. They requested records. They paid attention. The fear was gone. And once fear disappears, people become difficult to control. I attended that meeting, but I didn't sit in the front. I didn't need to. I watched from the back of the room as neighbors discussed transparency, accountability, and rebuilding trust. Things that should have existed from the beginning. The new board also reached out to me about restoring the damaged section of my property. They offered to help repair the fence line and clean up the areas affected by the unauthorized construction. I accepted, not because I wanted anything from them, because fixing something broken is always better than watching it stay damaged. One afternoon, while replacing an old fence post, I found something buried near the ground. A small metal marker. One my grandfather had placed there years ago. It was rusty, covered in dirt, but still visible. I wiped it clean with my glove and held it in my hand. That tiny piece of metal survived storms, construction, and someone trying to erase it. It reminded me of everything that happened. People sometimes think justice arrives with a loud explosion, a dramatic moment, a perfect victory. But real justice usually works differently. It arrives slowly, quietly, one document at a time, one person speaking up at a time, one truth surviving long enough for people to see it. Victoria Caldwell believed she could take land because she had authority. She believed paperwork could replace ownership. She believed nobody would challenge her. But she was wrong about the one thing that mattered most. She underestimated the value of someone who refused to give up. Today, when I stand on that land, I don't think about the lawsuit. I don't think about the arguments. I don't even think about Victoria anymore. I think about my grandfather, the man who built that fence, the man who saved every document, the man who taught me that ownership isn't just about having something. It's about respecting what was trusted to you. And after everything that happened, I finally understood his lesson. Justice isn't loud. It doesn't need to threaten. It doesn't need to intimidate. It simply waits. It collects the truth. And when the right moment comes, it stands there quietly and proves that it was right all along.